It's great. Whoa, all of a sudden. Great to have everybody here. Thank you for coming today. I am Sonal Shah, the CEO of the Texas Tribune, and we are super excited to be here in Odessa at the college. I can't believe how big the college has become. It's amazing. And we're so excited to have this conversation today on the state of oil, and more importantly, to be here, have more conversations with all of you on the important topics in the region, in the important topics in our state, and how we can bring communities together for these conversations. So thank you for coming today. And I want to just give a shout out to Representative Landgraf. Thank you for coming here today. Really appreciate for all the work that you do in the legislature. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Matt Ewalt, who will introduce the panel.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Ewalt, Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism for the Tribune. Welcome to those joining us here in person here in Odessa, and those joining us online for our program titled West Texas, the State of Oil. Oil and gas production in West Texas broke records last year. The Texas Oil and Gas Association reported that Texas supplied 42% of the nation's oil in 2023, with most of that oil coming from the Permian Basin. So how is this massive energy effort impacting the local communities? Today we'll talk about how the industry has changed communities like Midland and Odessa, how oil companies are partnering with local entities to train the next generation of oil workers, and what is being done to address environmental concerns around this massive drilling enterprise. We are joined today by Savannah Morales, CEO of the Midland Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Stephen Robertson, Executive Vice President of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, and Catherine Zimmerman, Decarbonization Director, Americas at Wood. Our moderator is Carlos Nogueras Ramos, Permian Basin reporter for the Texas Tribune, based here in Odessa. Our program will run an hour with 45 minutes for conversation and 15 minutes for your questions. Here in Odessa, we have a mic for our in-person audience, and our virtual audience can also submit questions online at our Q&A portal. That's at texastribune.org/ask. On behalf of my Tribune colleagues, I want to thank all those throughout the state who support the impactful journalism of the Tribune, including those who have become members. To learn more and to become a member, visit texastribune.org/support. We are honored to be here in Odessa and at Odessa College for two events this week. Tomorrow, we reconvene here in this space for an event titled Local News and Democracy, part of our year-long We the Texans project focused on the state of democracy here in Texas. We'll have lunch here at 12 p.m. and a program start of 12:30 p.m. focused on how communities are working to ensure access to reliable information. And on May 22nd, we'll gather in Dallas and online for a program focused on how communities in Texas are coming together to find innovative solutions to better address young Texans' mental health. You can find more information, including all of our speakers confirmed for these programs, at texastribune.org/events. And lastly, tickets are now on sale for Texas's breakout politics and policy event, the Texas Tribune Festival, which returns to downtown Austin from September 5th through 7th. Join us for 3 days of unforgettable conversations about the issues that matter to Texans at our annual celebration of big, bold ideas. Purchase your tickets at tribfest.org. Now let's get to know our panel. Savannah Morales serves the Midland community as CEO of the Midland Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. She's an experienced entrepreneur, and community leader known for her dedication to supporting local businesses and nonprofit organizations. She previously served as CEO of the Odessa Hispanic Chamber and is an active community volunteer, contributing her time to the local food bank, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and Hispanic Heritage. Stephen Robertson is Executive VP of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, an oil and gas trade association representing all aspects of the industry throughout southeastern New Mexico and West Texas. He is their consulting attorney, manages the daily operations of offices in 3 cities, supports and grows the association's membership, and advocates on behalf of the Permian Basin oil and gas industry on the local, state, national, and even international levels. Named one of the industry's top 50 women in hydrogen by the Hydrogen Economist and a Woman Who Means Business by the Houston Business Journal, Catherine Zimmerman is an expert in hydrogen and carbon capture, two of the world's fastest growing clean energy solutions. Her career story began in oil and gas as a process engineer for offshore and shale market sectors. Seeing the opportunities for new energies to achieve net zero, she now plays a leading role in developing solutions for decarbonization to reduce emissions and helping the world's energy companies effectively deliver major clean hydrogen and carbon capture projects. And our moderator, Carlos Nogueras Ramos, is a regional reporter for the Texas Tribune based in Odessa, telling the stories of Texas from the Permian Basin region. He joined the Texas Tribune in 2023 in partnership with Report for America. And before the Tribune, Carlos spent time in Philadelphia writing about local politics, including the city's 100th mayoral election. I thank our panel and our audience for being here in Odessa and those joining us from around the state this afternoon. And with that, I turn the program over to Carlos.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carlos Nogueras Ramos, the Texas Tribune's Permian Basin reporter. We thank you for joining us here at Odessa College's Salisbury Hall and online for a conversation with industry and community leaders about the state of oil and gas in West Texas. When I told friends and family that I had accepted a job in Odessa last year and would move here for work, they were bewildered, and their confusion was understandable. It's hard to look past the pump jacks and oil rigs. But in the neighborhoods beyond them, parents dress their kids for school. People get ready for work. It's a community as busy as its oil fields. And make no mistake, it is busy here. As Matt said, in 2023, the region contributed 42% of the nation's oil, breaking its own records. New technology to streamline drilling and reduce pollution is on the horizon. Some of it is already here. There's no denying it. West Texas will play a crucial role in the nation's search for energy independence and set the tone for domestic production of crude oil and natural gas. What kind of community will it take to sustain such an operation? Stephen, we've been talking numbers philosophically for a while, for a year, and since the Texas Oil and Gas Association's report, we've been able to kind of nail down specifically what the impact of the oil and gas industry has been in Texas. But I wonder if you could put it into context for us. 42% of the nation's oil, what does that say about the Permian Basin, and what does that look like on the ground?
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Matt, and thank you, everybody at the Texas Tribune for coming out. We greatly appreciate your engagement in the community out here. You're always welcome to come join us for any conversation you want to have. I'd also like to thank Chairman Landgraf and the rest of those folks in Odessa for ordering us this gorgeous weather. This is a fantastic spring day for West Texas, so it's a great day to be here and have this gorgeous view outside this wonderful facility. You know, you talk about the numbers, and in particular, you're talking about Texas, 42%, but the reality is, if you look at the Permian Basin, which isn't just West Texas, but also southeast New Mexico, this region accounts for 46 to 47% of the crude oil produced in the United States. That makes this region, if it were its own nation, the fourth largest producing nation in the world. We also happen to be the second largest natural gas producing region in the United States, accounting for about 20% of the natural gas produced. And that's just incredible numbers to really think about, especially if you look at the comparison to just about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the jokes in this region were, okay, which company's gonna be the last one to shut off the lights? We were a dwindling producing region. We've been producing now for over 100 years, and people thought we were kind of at the end of our life. Yet new technologies, utilization of older technologies in new ways, the amazing way that people out here, that I truly believe that is our most important resource. It's not what's under the ground. It's absolutely the people above the ground out here that make the difference. We wouldn't be able to produce the resources we produce out here without those people. So that's absolutely an important part of the conversation. But if you don't have all of those things working together, we don't get to being the largest producing region in the United States. And interestingly enough, if you look at information from the International Energy Agency, they're projecting that the United States is still the place for 2024 and 2025 where new development is going to come from in oil and gas. So those are just a 2-year projection out. We're kind of already into 2024, but it's not something to show that, oh, we're now at the new end. This is just a continuation of where we've come from, and it's a fantastic story about where we're going to keep going.
Something else that stood out to us about the report is the emphasis on the industry's contribution back into the economy. Again, something that's not always readily apparent. So could you give us some specifics as to what have been some of the areas where the industry has given back?
Yeah, one of the things I want to talk about first is a lot of times people get focused on, and that report talked about taxes and royalties and fees that are going to the state, which are tremendous numbers. But just to think about where we sit right now, the building we sit in is only possible because of oil and gas development. The Salisbury family is an oil and gas family that is a construction family that deals around the world in projects, but got their start and is based out here in Odessa. And that's largely the projects that they work on. We wouldn't have this building. We wouldn't have the D. Kirk Edwards Human Health Facility over at UTPB. We wouldn't have the facilities we have at Midland College. So we wouldn't have the opportunity to educate the next generation of Permian Basin citizens on what they need, equip them with the tools they need to be able to help our communities move forward without the money that oil and gas companies, oil and gas individuals inject outside of the taxes and royalties and revenue. But if you want to look at those numbers, they're even more fantastic to most people that aren't impacted by those local education investments. And you're talking about records that were set last year. And why were those records set last year? Well, if you look at the world used more energy last year than they ever have. That doesn't mean we have a dedication to one form of energy. That doesn't mean we have an addiction to oil. That means that energy makes people's lives better. If you look back in the early 1800s, over 80% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. That was really before coal came on as a primary fuel source. Coal transitioning to oil, transitioning to natural gas as primary fuel sources. Today, with record population around the world, less than 8% of the world's population lives in extreme poverty. If you want to talk about the impact that dollars have from the oil and gas industry, they lift people out of poverty. They make the quality of life that people have around the world better, extraordinarily better. And that's something we want to continue to see and see happen. And if you look just across the border over New Mexico, specifically talking about dollars, the amount of revenue that was generated by the oil and gas industry in New Mexico provided for half of that state's general revenue for their budget last year. It's a tremendous value to that state that provides for roads, provides for education, provides for healthcare, provides with so many other state and local community resources that come from the government that would not exist without those dollars. If you look at the state of Texas doubled the amount of contribution to the state coffers here that New Mexico did at over, I think it's $26 billion last year. It's a tremendous value. In Texas, we're a lot larger state than they are in New Mexico. We have a lot of other revenue that contributes as well. So oil and gas isn't near as big a part of the pie as they are in New Mexico, but it's still a tremendous contribution. And it pays for education, it pays for roads, it pays for healthcare here just like it does in New Mexico. And without that revenue, we wouldn't have those resources to be able to offer to the people moving here. We have over 1,000 people moving to Texas every day. They're not bringing their own energy with them. They're not bringing their own electricity with them. They're not bringing their own homes with them. They are coming here looking for those things. And without this type of economic engine, we wouldn't be able to provide them. And so we're incredibly fortunate to be part of that out here, and we're humbled by it. I think that if you talk to most people out in this region, they are blue-collar people that want to just get to work, want to figure out solutions for the problems in front of them and not fret about what tomorrow is going to bring. And I think that makes this region something that is sustainable and has been for so many years.
On that point, Savannah, one of the best parts of my job as a reporter here, when I work on any oil and gas piece, is getting to talk to some of the regular everyday folks who work in the industry, and kind of, and if they don't, they experience the industry just like I do. We live, breathe, and sometimes can even taste oil and gas. As the CEO of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing and advocating for the business sector. Talk to us about what the social perception of the oil and gas industry is here. What do you hear on the ground?
Well, being part of, the Midland Hispanic Chamber, I work with a lot of small mom and pop shops. So we do a lot of events that come out. And I love seeing, we see the support from the oil industry. When you see your children that are out there, they have Diamondback on their uniforms. We see them giving back to the community. Not only do they come and they bring us strong economic development, because the workers that come and move here to our Permian Basin area, they also shop at our mom and pop shops. They also come in and they bring the money here. So it helps our businesses. It's a huge impact. Whenever the oil slows down, we have a lot of businesses that will shut down. So it's very important to keep that industry going, because that is what we're made of here in the Permian Basin area. So I see them in a lot of organizations giving back on our events when we host, when we have Safe Place. They're there supporting and giving money for them to continue their operations. So I feel it's very beneficial for us to be able to have that.
There is more to the Permian than Midland and Odessa. But these are the two fastest growing cities. I should know, I drive here every day. And they are both also predominantly Hispanic. Mm-hmm. Again, just do they understand the influence that the industry has over these two cities and these regions? They move here for jobs. So do they see it as more than jobs?
Yeah, because we bring in, with the oil industry, we bring in the jobs for our families, but we also bring in tourism things that we have. That money is able to provide for people to become entrepreneurs, to open up more businesses, to be able to have more things in our area. Trying to think of other ways. I mean, it just has a huge impact on how we operate daily basis, on how our jobs opportunities are very great here. I mean, you can start off at entry level and work your way up to the CEO of an oil industry. It just feels it opens up the platform for so many employers for them to be able to go and chase off an engineering, mechanical engineering degree. It just goes into education. It goes into the opportunity to build a business here. It touches a matter of every aspect in our lives.
Katie, you serve as Decarbonization Director for Wood. And first, immediately my question is, what does that mean?
That's a fair, great question. Okay, so basically when we talk about energy, now we kind of look at two facets. There's energy security, which is making sure that everyone has clean, affordable, reliable energy, which is of the utmost importance, especially with the global context right now. And then there's also energy transition. And what we're talking about with energy transition isn't picking winners or losers. And I tell people, I heard this from the University of Houston, so I am borrowing it, but they said, focus on the emissions, not the fuel. And I think that's a really great narrative, especially for us in Texas, is I like to think of us as an energy state, not even necessarily oil and gas. Like, we're also one of the world's largest wind producers. And when you look out and you see the pump jacks going in West Texas, you also see wind turbines. So we do energy really well in Texas in particular. And so what I do as decarbonization director is try to figure out, how do we continue to provide clean, affordable, reliable energy? If we can reduce emissions on everything that we do on the energy security side, that's typically the cheapest way and most effective way to reduce emissions. So lots of what we focus on is, where's the methane going? So can we keep the methane inside the pipes? And then we're also looking at, for sometimes with some of the processes that we have, especially in oil and gas, like we were talking about 42% of the nation's oil and gas are oil. So then that oil typically is going in a pipeline somewhere like Houston, Corpus, Louisiana, and it's turning into products and fuels for the rest of the country. So when we look at how do we reduce emissions, there are some things that when we make different products, CO2 comes from the process. And when that happens, carbon capture tends to be the only way that you can really reduce those emissions. So what I do in my job is try to figure out how can we reduce emissions. So that'll look at electrification, that'll look at hydrogen, carbon capture, biofuels. We're using every tool that we have to try to figure out what makes the most sense for a particular application. And that's essentially what a decarbonization director does.
And the company certainly is leading some cutting-edge technology in carbon capture sequestration. Talk to us about how the technology works. How do you trap something we can't see?
Carbon capture, it has been around for a long time. So it's been around since the 1930s. But what we're talking about now that makes it so unique is the particular applications that we're trying to use it for and the scale. So if you think about right now, about 40 million metric tons of CO2 is captured every year. And if anyone saw like the full page ad that ExxonMobil took out in the Houston Chronicle a couple years ago, they want to capture 100 million metric tons per year in the Houston area. So that's 2.5 times roughly the global amount that we're doing now. And you're not just targeting oil and gas with that. You're looking at cement, you're looking at steel, glass, a lot of these hard to abate sectors. And when you start trying to figure out how am I going to capture the CO2 from that, it's kind of like with oil and gas. Oil and gas isn't just oil and gas. There's a whole lot of other stuff in there that we have to treat and process to get the products and the fuels that we use every day. Similarly for CO2, when you're capturing it off of all these different processes, each process has its own contaminants and has different things that react differently in it. So what the technologies are trying to do now is really target specific applications and make sure that we can do it in a cost-effective way. A lot of people have brought up to me, they've said, well, does carbon capture work? Yes, from a technical perspective, it works. Where we've had some difficult problems in the past, a lot of people in Texas think about Petronova. That was carbon capture off of power, and it's just southwest of Houston. And it got shut down for a few years because the economics on that project didn't work for that period of time. And it was actually related to the oil price because that CO2 was being used for enhanced oil recovery. And when we're building projects now, we have to make sure that they technically stand up, but also economically. So trying to figure out how do we make sure that when we do a project, it's going to pay for itself and it's going to contribute to the local community. It's not just going to be capturing CO2 and making everything more expensive for everyone. That's definitely not the goal. But so for point source capture, which is where you're putting like the carbon capture on a stream, like if you think about all the flue gas that comes off of a process, anytime you have a fired heater, anything like that for an industrial process, you can use carbon capture, and we would call that point source. Then there's also direct air capture, and that's what's getting a lot of attention right now. The Department of Energy is spending literally billions of dollars over the next few years trying to get direct air capture commercialized and scaled. And direct air capture is essentially you're sucking the CO2 out of the air. And there are some really promising technologies that we've seen, but just like with anything, you can do it in a lab, but we want to see how does it actually get applied and what can we do with it. So that's kind of where engineers are with carbon capture, is we're trying to figure out how do we, A, do it, and then how do we do it at scale, and then how do we make sure that it's commercial so that it pays for itself.
You mentioned some of the uses of carbon capture, aside from the environmental benefits, which is enhanced oil recovery, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's using whatever of the components we're capturing to extract oil.
So historically, like we've been doing at Wood EOR in Texas for over 20 years, working on some of the projects for operators who are doing it. But the CO2 that we've used for that traditionally tends to be naturally occurring CO2, And we know that we can take CO2 that we've captured and use it for the same purposes. And when you do that, we have a specification, just like any pipeline that is running around Texas now has a specification somebody is having to meet to put their product or their stuff in the pipeline. You do the same thing with CO2. You tell people this is what that CO2 has to look like before it gets put in the pipeline. So engineers will have a specification, and we'll make sure that we take out everything that wouldn't do well in a pipeline, and then we'll make sure that it's also going to react well with the well. And that's the sort of stuff engineers are always looking at. But so for EOR, that's something Texans are experts at.
Stephen, I'll get back to you in a second because I want your input. But could you draw a picture, infrastructure-wise? What does this look like? What does it take to, Oxy is one of the companies leading in the region for a massive direct air capture operation. But my question is, just infrastructure-wise, what does that look like? And then also something I'd like for us to discuss is you said you look for the most cost-effective ways to engage in these projects. But it's my understanding that these are very cost prohibitive and expensive, primarily because it's new.
Yes, it is new. And that's kind of why we want to try things and make sure that we learn as we go. Like, okay, look at shale. I hope a lot of people around here are going to be shale experts. But when shale started, when I first started doing shale projects, everyone said, okay, you have to inject really expensive chemicals into the ground, and you have to get really, really fancy ceramic proppants that cost a lot of money, and these wells are going to be super, super expensive, and then will scale eventually. But by the time that I stopped doing shale projects, it was you can use almost any brine, not any brine, but you can use a lot of different waters. You can use whatever sand next door. It doesn't really matter. We've found ways to really take down the cost to drill a well. And that's the kind of curve that we're looking for with direct air capture, with carbon capture. But the only way that we're going to get that is for us to try things. And until we really deploy the technology, it's all just theoretical. And that's where we're kind of on the cusp of that now. And I really liked one of the points Stephen made earlier. He was talking about, Texas, when we did our energy growth, there's coal. And then we went to oil because we had so much, right? When oil was first found in Texas, we had so much oil compared to, I think 3 of our first 6 wells outproduced all of Russia, which was the top producing country at the time. But our oil wasn't good enough to make kerosene. And that's what people used it for at the time. So we found a new way, we found new markets, and that's kind of what we're looking to do for energy transition now. It's not something Texans should be afraid of. We will find a way to continue to provide clean, affordable, reliable energy. And a critical part of that right now is also carbon capture.
Stephen, I'm hearing that this is, it's a turning point for the industry. The federal government is providing, financial incentives for oil and gas companies to take this on. Do you agree with me that this is a turning point in the industry, and do you expect to see this technology widespread?
So I think that first off, when you think of something like turning point, if people are thinking of, quote, watershed moments, similar to what Katie was talking about, this is the next step. It's not necessarily a turning point in that sense. With the production that has been able to be obtained out here and the uses of that production throughout the world in so many different facets, and a lot of people use the phrase, and it's something that has become very common, that idea of an energy transition. The reality is, we have been on an energy expansion since about the 1850s, and that continues. We broke records this last year in how much energy the world demanded. Unless we have a pandemic type event again that shuts down industry around the world, this year we will break records again, and the next year we will break records again. So the reality is, how, as Katie was saying, do we get more efficient at what we're producing, at what we're using as well? If you look at the United States, since 1980, our population has almost doubled. It's grown 47%. yet our energy usage has only gone up 29%. And interestingly enough, in Tier 1 emissions, we've actually reduced by 60% where we were at in 1980. So we are doing better today on emissions reduction and capturing than we were in the 1980s, yet we're producing more energy for more people. And so that is absolutely an important part of the conversation. So when you talk about is it a turning point, I think the worry is if some people see this as a turning away from hydrocarbon-based energy, what they are really saying is we're turning away from humanity. We're turning away with providing people a better quality of life. We're turning away with providing people opportunity. We're turning away with providing people the chance to change their own circumstances. Savannah was talking about it earlier. What the oil and gas industry really is the epitome of the American dream. You can come into this industry without any education, without any connections to somebody in the industry, without any knowledge, and if you are willing to put in the time and effort, you can not only create a life for yourself, you can create generational wealth for your family. And so I'd hate to see us see this as a turning away from the oil and gas industry or away from hydrocarbon energy, and that's the turning point. What I want to see us do is work together to figure out a better way to not only capture carbon, but have the opportunities to either utilize it positively or sequester it properly. And so that is something that we want the government turning towards us, towards the experts in our industry to say, how do we do this? Not a year from now, not 10 years from now. How do we do this now? How do we make this a reality? And yes, there's going to be trials and tribulations. Yes, we're going to learn from what we are doing. But the only way we can do that is by trying. And if the decision is we're not going to try this anymore, I am worried that that's the kind of turning point that I don't want to see because of the devastating impacts it'll have for our country. I think people have gotten so used to the abundance that we live with, and we live at a fantastic time. There are more people living on this planet with more abundance than ever have in our history. But if we don't have reliable, affordable energy, you are limited severely in the amount of travel that you can do. Traveling from city to city, even Midland to Odessa, might be limited to only the most rich in our communities, let alone being able to travel to another state, travel to another country, being able to have more than one choice of a loaf of bread at your local grocery store, being able to have a choice of fruit out of season, completely out the window. If we don't have the transportation infrastructure in place supported by a fuel source like oil and gas to be able to provide that amount of transportation. So in the sense of, again, is this a turning point? I'm worried that it's a turning point in the wrong direction. If it is a turning point towards the future, towards improvement of what we do, towards a support of energy for all, that's fantastic. But we need that message coming from our federal government, not the message of oil and gas is over in 5 years, let's move on to the next thing.
But so on that point, the more we produce, the more we emit. So, these...
But that's not true, Carlos. We're producing more now with lower emissions. The Railroad Commission of Texas has statistics that show from 2011 to 2022, Kenny and I were talking about this a little while ago, we are producing, or we have 85% less methane emissions in that time frame. Yet we are producing so much more crude oil.
400% more.
400% more crude oil. So no, it's not the more we produce oil and gas, the more emissions we have. That's the lie that most people have been told. But that's not the reality. And it's the job of people like this up here. It's the job of these type of conversations to make sure people in the public truly understand what's going on.
But so you see this technology as a way for the industry to continue to comply
Absolutely.
With federal environmental regulation.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because when you talk about federal environmental regulation, we hear from a lot of our friends in the industry and a lot of people out there, there's this new methane rule. What am I supposed to do? Well, first off, which rule are you talking about? Are you talking about the new Quad O-B, the Quad O-C? Are you talking about the new greenhouse gas reporting rules? Are you talking about Subpart W, Subpart B? Are you talking about a possible non-attainment designation for the Permian Basin? There are so many different regulations out there. There's a report out there right now from a group called the Institute for Energy Research that shows that this administration that we're currently underneath has over 200 actions that they have already taken opposed to oil and gas development in the United States, with over 70 that they are still working on. You would think oil and gas has never been regulated before, yet that's not the case. Not only do we have regulation from the federal level, we also have regulation from the state level. Does that mean that we're great at it? Absolutely not. Should we be better at it? Absolutely. But that happens by communication. That happens by working together. That doesn't happen by shutting the door on people. And that's what we want to make sure is happening. just like you asked that question of, don't we have more emissions? No, let's talk about the real data. Let's talk about what's really going on out there. So again, appreciate so much the opportunity to be here today to talk about that.
Thanks, Stephen. Savannah, let's turn to you. We sort of got into the weeds here, which we warned when would this happen at one point in the panel. But talk to us again, from your perspective and just the general social reaction to the advancements in the technology and how the industry is changing. What is the perception from your perspective?
Well, as I'm listening to you guys, I'm learning here at the same time. Carlos called me and asked me to sit on here. I was like, I'm not an expert in oil and gas, but I'm really learning a lot on here. And I just want to say I appreciate the fact that y'all are trying to work to make it more effective for our community, because all the new technologies that you can do, my heart is based on the community, on these breadwinners, on, our community leaders, our anybody in general, how you make it safe for them to go to work and how you're improving that type of technology, because I appreciate the fact you are doing that, because it brings our loved ones back home. As having a lot of family that work in that industry, and basically a lot of our area here in the Permian Basin wide, it's, oil field is where you go after you graduate high school. Their goal is to get into the oil field industry, they have the opportunity now at the CTE school they're building here. You can get in and learn the oil field industry and how you can be a mechanical engineer, you can go into geologist. There's just so much things. So to know that the depth of the insight is what I'm learning right here, and I appreciate that. The fact that y'all are trying to make it to where it's not going to affect us as much, and now we get to hear the insight of that instead of just thinking, oh man, no, these guys really don't care. But so I just want to say thank you.
I want to put out a question for the panel, on Savannah's answer. Is there a place for the traditional oil and gas worker in the direction that we're headed?
Yes. What I always tell people is the people that know best how to optimize production are the people that have done oil and gas. And I originally got into decarbonization because I was from oil and gas, right? So I realized a lot of the projects I was doing to increase production also were decreasing the emissions associated with each barrel of oil that we were producing. And that was kind of my gateway into decarbonization. And I think the same will happen for a lot of other people. And also understanding the equipment, understanding what are we trying to do here. That's where we need the entrepreneurs and the people that think about things differently to also join. The energy landscape right now in Texas is one that demands so much collaboration, and it's people that have been in oil and gas, it's people that have been doing renewables, it's people that have been totally outside of industry and just have an idea where they say, hey, this is either really crazy or really brilliant, and I don't know which one it is yet. And we need to kind of be those mavericks and figure out how do we do everything better so that we win as a state.
And great answer. I think to talk about a few numbers, just kind of keep things in perspective, there's over 480,000 people in the state of Texas directly employed in oil and gas. Yet, in March of 2024, there were 4,500 new job openings in the upstream sector alone, which was the largest opening of jobs in that sector of the industry, which is what we do out here, since 2011. So in the sense of, is the industry going away with technology? No. Is the industry growing with technology? Yes. Should technology be utilized? Absolutely. And what it should be done, and which is usually the target for technology, especially innovation in areas which we haven't even touched on, like AI, is to help people by improving their job abilities and qualities, and also taking the things out of their jobs that they don't really want to do in the first place. It's not getting rid of the workers. We don't want to get rid of the workers at all. We need those workers, not just the manual labor folks out in the field, but everybody along the chain. I mean, the professionals, the office folks, the support folks that are all out here. I mean, the reality is, and something that we talk about often with our association, we're kind of unique in this way compared to some other trade associations that represent the industry, that because we're based in the basin where we represent, we have banks, we have law firms, we have accounting firms, we have restaurants that are all members of our association, because they might not directly be in the oil and gas industry, but they are in the oil and gas industry because they don't exist without those other jobs, without that revenue. The industry, on average, pays people $124,000 a year. That's not executives. That's everybody. Average $124,000 a year. That is twice the average private industry job in the state of Texas. So there are opportunities. You see growth just as recent as March, high employment numbers. There is opportunities in the sense of revenue. There's also opportunities to improve the quality of life and the quality of work that you are doing because of new technologies. So there is absolutely a future in this industry and in the other industries that it's going to need to be able to continue to thrive.
But there are parts of the industry that just don't look exactly the same as they used to anymore. So talk to me about how the industry is approaching those, those oncoming workers.
Well, and I'll say one thing in particular. Katie mentioned earlier that when oil really started to be developed in the United States, it was to save the whales. It was to get rid of whale blubber as a fuel source and find something instead. And that's what oil and gas did, especially in the United States. We don't use oil really for kerosene anymore. That's not near the priority point. We have evolved. We continue to evolve, and we're going to continue to do that. And we want to accept folks of all different walks of life into our industry. I mean, the reality is, if you are willing to put in the time and effort, we have a place for you. And I think that you would see that with people that move out here. You asked Savannah earlier about people in the community and what they think. Is it just a job? Is it a part of their life? I think that people that really give Midland, Odessa, the Permian Basin a chance tend to love this area. I mean, you can find culture, you can find food, you can find entertainment, you can find family, you can find community, all of the things that we should be looking for in life. And the other reality is, it might kind of sound a little cliche, but we were the first place in the United States to have both a commercial and a spaceport at the same location. We have an airport and a commercial spaceport at the same location. So we are already looking into the future of what do we need next? What's the transportation that we need? Not just for the people that live out here, but for people around the world. And so there's amazing opportunities available for people here, and I don't want to see people look away from that.
Katie, what role will the Permian Basin play as we start to introduce more of these projects that you explained earlier?
I think a lot of the innovation that we've had in energy to date has been very reliant on the Permian Basin, and I think it will continue to do that for the future. So we're going to need to figure out how do we do everything we've ever done before, but bigger and better, very Texas style. But another thing, Carlos, just because we mentioned you're from Philly, and Stephen mentioned the whales, the Vanity Fair article that comes to mind is like in 1861, there was this Vanity Fair article with a bunch of whales in tails, and it was saying like the whales celebrating the finding of oil in Pennsylvania, right? And I still think about that, like Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was before Texas, and then Kansas, but I never hear people talk as excitedly about Pennsylvania or Texas and their place, Pennsylvania or Kansas in energy and where they are. So what I like about Texas, we continue to evolve, and we're all about business and energy. And so figuring out how do we provide clean, affordable, reliable energy for the rest of the United States and globally. And that's where I think the Permian Basin will continue to be a significant player.
Savannah, we talk about the industry almost like it's a person, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like a next door neighbor. Mm-hmm. So as a neighbor, how is the oil and gas industry? Do folks feel like they're a good neighbor to y'all and to the people here?
Yes, I would say yes. I mean, like I say, they're so involved in everything. Like I made the point about how they give back onto the roads and how they give back on. I go back to the shopping a lot because, I'm here to advocate for businesses. That's my goal, is to make sure whatever business opens, that they stay open and that they succeed in being open. And so it goes back to that. Without the oil industry having our good neighbor here, we experienced, I think it was 2008 where Odessa had the shutdown down, and we have our own bakery, which is the Melody's Bakery, and you can just see the difference when the oil was down on how the sales just drastically dropped. How we didn't see the men walking in with the boots anymore and the coveralls coming in. Like, it's a huge impact. It's a huge impact in our community. So it is a good neighbor. I love at the Midland Chamber, we have so many of the oil industries who are members now, and I get to sit down and talk with them, and I get to learn about them, and I see how much they give back into their employees as well. They do so much creative activities with them. They host so many things. Like Apache does this amazing Halloween where every floor decorates, and they just get back into them, because these people who work in the industry of the oil field, they're not employees. They see it as a career. And that's what I love. I love to see that. I love to see that there is a career when you're in the oil field industry.
We have 2 minutes before audience questions, but Stephen, I think this is a good time to close this off. What are the challenges looking into the future for the oil and gas industry?
So I think that's a great question. The reality is, and there's a gentleman in the audience who I've had many conversations with named Skylar White, who absolutely knows some of these challenges firsthand, is the lack of infrastructure that we have to take advantage of the growth we have is restraining. Whether it is pipeline infrastructure to be able to move hydrocarbon products or water products or CO2, whether it is road infrastructure to be able to make sure that everybody is safe going out and coming back home, whether it is electrical transmission and distribution infrastructure to be able to make sure that as we electrify the oil and gas industry out here in the Permian Basin, we can actually do that efficiently and effectively without causing issues for this region or for the rest of the state. Those are all incredibly important. And one of the things that we have seen most recently, which is not the first time that we've seen it, but is a reality that we suffer from time to time out here, is we are a crude oil producing basin first and foremost. We also happen to produce a good amount of natural gas. But because of constraints on natural gas, in particular getting it to market, not having the infrastructure in place, having things in place like a pause on natural gas or liquid natural gas exports, greatly limits the ability to take advantage of that natural gas. But because the value of oil is so high right now, the oil is still going to be produced, but you can't just produce the oil. You're going to produce the natural gas and the water as well. And when we don't have the infrastructure in place to get that natural gas to market where it can be taken advantage of, the safest, most effective, most environmentally friendly thing you can do next is flare it in the field. And we don't want that to happen. But that's what happens when we don't have infrastructure in place. And that's just one of the examples of the challenges we have. But largely, it's that we need investment in the infrastructure to make sure that what we do out here, that $26 billion that we give to the state, can continue to happen.
All right, perfect timing.
Excellent. And for those who are joining us online, remind you that you can ask your questions at texastribune.org/ask. For those who are gathered here in person, you're welcome to join us at the mic to ask your question. All I ask is that your question has a question mark at the end of it, so that we can get to as many people as possible. I'll ask one question from online, and then we'll turn it over to our in-person audience. This person writes, West Texas has large amounts of aging oil extraction infrastructure. Some are referred to as orphan wells. The Texas Tribune has been closely covering one in particular in Crane County that has formed multiple toxic lakes. This problem is expanding to hundreds, perhaps thousands of wells. What is the industry doing to clean up their mess and protect property owners, the groundwater, and livelihoods?
So I'm guessing I'm probably the best one to try to jump in on that one. Really appreciate the question, and the reality is it's a relatively complex situation because of legality, because of technical requirements, but truly, the industry wants to take care of the issues that we have out there. We know we have aging infrastructure. We know that there are wells out there that might have a clearly identified legal owner and others that don't. And there is funds set up through the Railroad Commission of Texas specifically for that purpose, to plug and take care of abandoned wells that don't have an owner, those orphaned wells. There's other realities of there were former oil and gas wells that were then transferred over ownership to surface owners. And technically, those are not oil and gas wells anymore. Does that mean that they shouldn't be cleaned up? Does that mean the oil and gas industry doesn't have the know-how to possibly help with that? Absolutely not. And that's something that people want to lean into. But the framework needs to be put in place so that when people are engaging in that type of activity, the liability is appropriately understood and known before they start moving forward to be able to take care of those situations. You also see the federal government stepping in and trying to provide funding to help plug abandoned wells. And so it's not just an issue that happens in Texas. Katie mentioned where oil all started in the United States over in Pennsylvania. They have a worse issue with this than we really do because they had been producing for so long. There are so many more wells out in their fields that no one even knows about. And that's an issue slightly in the state of Texas that we need to continue to focus on. But the reality is a system that helps to communicate what the issue is, to be able to register where those wells are located and be able to have the right funding mechanism in place is there. Could it use more support? I think so. And it's something that as a trade association, we tend to advocate for almost every session down in Austin is to try to get more funding to help support those efforts. And that funding doesn't come from taxpayers outside the industry. It's fees and it's taxes that are assessed to the industry. So we're not asking people outside the industry to put money into this fund to pay for these issues. We're just asking for the money that is paid by the industry to be used to help with these situations.
Well, that was most of my question that I was going to ask. Y'all pretty much know what I'm all about, but you know, we've been ranching out here for a long time, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And y'all haven't talked a whole lot about the water. You know, the water system out here. We're out here in the desert. The water out here is just really critical. And to me, that's the weak link in all this wonderful technology and everything. And I'm just thinking that the industry needs to have a paradigm shift in how they look at this water. We need to quit using fresh water for fracking. We need to get on these orphan wells and get these things plugged so that they're not polluting our groundwater. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to survive in the next century. So I guess my question is kind of a follow-up to that other one is, when are we going to have a paradigm shift in how we look at water and how we look at groundwater contamination and all of that, so that we really, really, really get serious about this?
So Skylar, I appreciate the question. And interestingly enough, so tomorrow there's an event called the Permian Basin Environmental Regulatory Seminar. At that event, there's an award given out called the Bruno Hansen Environmental Excellence Award. It's been an award that's been given out since 1996, given to somebody in industry that is working on environmental issues, and not just, we've got an idea, but is actually putting boots to the ground, making something happen. And the company that's going to get awarded tomorrow is Texas Pacific Water Resources. And they are specifically working on pilot projects on how to take water from the industry, produced water, and reuse it outside of the industry. So not only can we limit the amount of fresh water used in the industry, but we can use what people call water, but if anybody's ever seen it, you would say that doesn't look like water at all, that comes up from a well from thousands of feet below the ground, outside the industry for something else, to be able to be beneficial to those outside, to be able to help really in the fact that, I mean, we're on the northern edge of the Chihuahuan Desert, and we need to take care of our water resources, and we have an opportunity to not only do better with our freshwater resources, but to use those produced water resources in a positive and effective way.
So I didn't talk about it here because it wasn't really relevant, but engineers are very interested in beneficial reuse. And I mean, so I worked in shale, I said that, but one of my coworkers and I have a patent that's for using shale-produced water for solution mining, and we were targeting potash. And that was inspired by West Texas and Southeast New Mexico. If you look in right around the Carlsbad area, you have all of these mines that are right around oil and gas operations. And when you ask the mines, how are you going to do solution mining? They said, well, we have freshwater wells, and we dig those, and then we heat the water up, and we add a bunch of salt. And I thought, we have a bunch of hot, salty water from shale. So there are a lot of things that engineers are working on. The issue was always scale and timing, and then figuring out how do you commercialize it, and how do you make sure that it's tested and it's going to work. Because what you don't want to is to solve one problem and make a bunch of other ones. So I would say we're always trying, and we love new creative ideas if anyone has them. But industry would love to fix things, and we do think of like water as a resource. It's something that sometimes it's easier, like we were talking about, gas sometimes gets treated as something that's kind of a waste stream because we're after the oil, right? Water is similar. When you drill an oil well, especially in the Permian, you get a whole lot of water. And so how do you start having that shift to view that as a resource as well? That's something we've been working on as an industry for a long time, but I think the evolution continues.
Could I ask something? Because that's one thing I was wondering too while I was like researching and stuff. Like, where can we go up to find out what y'all guys are doing for that? Because that was when I think I looked up, it's like 6 million gallons a year that's used of fresh water. Like, how can we update as citizens, as ourselves, to know how are y'all going with that process for the water? Like, using, instead of fresh water, using what we call the gray water, or where can we as citizens look that information up?
So that's an absolutely great question. And the reality is something that has spawned over the past several years, specifically in the Permian Basin, but generally other places as well, are produced water conferences that happen. I think there's probably 3 or 4 that happen every year here. There's a fantastic one that's put on by UTPB and the Shepherd Leadership School that talks about all of these issues and talks about what people in the industry, the engineers, are doing to make tomorrow better. And so I don't think that there's necessarily one place that just has it all listed, but it's because part of it is it's an ongoing conversation. It continues to evolve every day. But we're very fortunate that those type of institutions have helped to support these educational opportunities for people to be able to really understand what's going on out there. Because it's not just to discuss the problems, going back to the point you made earlier, it's also to help young folks out there understand that's where I want to work. Like, I want to figure out how to find solutions to those problems. And so we want people to know about those things. So that's where I would recommend. And there happens to be somebody out in the crowd right now that would do a tremendous job of talking to you about that. And I'd be happy to introduce you afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
And then if you want to know, just while we talked about water, if you want to know what is everybody doing for carbon capture, what about hydrogen, why do those get linked? The Department of Energy actually has really amazing resources online that you can just do like a basic search, and the Department of Energy will even go through and list like some sample projects. And then you can see where those are, where the funding is going, because I only half jokingly say it's like, those are our tax dollars and that's what we are backing. So you can go and see, they'll have like a profile on carbon capture. Okay, and then where are they looking at sequestration? What are they looking at for utilization? And it's pretty nicely organized. It makes my engineering heart happy when I look at their website now, but it's gotten a lot better, I would say, even in the last couple of years. So there are resources that everyone can use.
Hi there. My name's Josh Hart. I'm working on a PhD in environmental policy at the moment, and I'm just curious to know what y'all think about where the greatest emphasis should be on environmental policy in our evolving petroleum industry as we try to produce enough energy to sustain our civilization and continue progress, but also maintain a responsible level of emissions. Where should the greatest emphasis on policy be?
Okay, you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So Josh, thank you for the question. I appreciate that. You know, one of the realities, and it absolutely goes towards what Katie does for a living, is our biggest threat to the continuation of what we do out here is being able to limit the emissions that we have. But the reality is, if we put such a restrictive regimen of regulation in place that it makes only the richest companies be able to exist, then we're greatly reducing the amount of people that can be involved in this industry, which also means we're reducing the amount of brain power that we have in the industry working towards problems. We don't want that to be the case. I think that the where we really need to be working towards is a structure that supports people in the oil and gas industry, that doesn't tell them that they're evil, that doesn't tell them that they're going to be out of a job in 5 years, that actually recognizes the important part that they play in society, to be able to say, let's figure out these problems together. And that's not really what we have right now. We have a very threatening regulatory regime in place that is going to keep people from investing. You know, one of the things that we didn't quite get to, but talking about how is the industry doing? We hear all the time that there's these threats from the federal government, and it's really reducing the ability of the industry, and then we're producing more oil than we ever have. So where is the evidence that there really is this threat? Well, if you look at it, there are less people in institutions of higher education enrolling in oil and gas specific career paths than there ever have been after we've grown to where we're at. there is less investment outside the industry in what we're doing. People are having to figure out how to turn cash flow into new operations as opposed to look for banking partners or investment partners outside the industry. There are more and more restraints on our ability to operate, which means we have to be more creative, which is fantastic, but it means we're running less rigs to be able to produce more oil. And so there's all of these things that are battering the industry, yet the industry is figuring out a way to survive. Why? Because the world says we have to. The world says we have to have this energy, please keep doing it. And so people do. But where is that turning point? Where is that breaking point that keeps us from continuing to do that? So I'd say it's a very long answer, but the shorter answer is a more cooperative regulatory regime that helps to figure out solutions with the industry as opposed to against the industry.
And I would say you focus on the emissions, not the fuel. And one thing that makes Texas great is that we go for the best solution, and we're not going to pick winners, and we're not going to pick losers. And if you look at the United States, even as we talk about emissions, if you decarbonize the United States, you don't even really move the needle on global emissions. So what we need to do is find, develop, scale, and commercialize the technology in Texas and then deploy it internationally. And so with policy, you want to encourage the behaviors you want to see. And I think really figuring out how do you incentivize emissions reductions, and then how do you incentivize that real entrepreneurial spirit that's always made us an energy leader.
I want to make sure we have time for two folks who've been waiting in line to ask questions, so go ahead.
My name is Ahmed Rashid, geology master student at UTPB. I want to thank you for the nice meeting. I have two short questions. The first one, according to Texas Railroad Commission, there is turning down in drilling activity permits, which will be effect on the hiring for an employment for the student or expert. And what's your reason? What's the reason and what's your expectation behind that? This is the first question. The second question, I have 15 years of experience in petroleum geology and petrophysics in Egypt, and one of my biggest dream to have my own company. So what's your advice and recommendation to initiate this serious process in my life? Thank you.
So on the first question, that's one of the other symptoms that we've seen by this regulatory effort towards the industry is a lack of new permits that are getting filed at the Railroad Commission. And part of that absolutely is the reality of we are figuring out how to produce more hydrocarbons from one location and longer laterals with horizontal drilling, so we don't need as many wells. But that also has been a traditional measurement of how healthy is the oil and gas industry. And so I think that is absolutely something we shouldn't ignore, and I think that it's a concern. And how you combat it, I think that it's a reality that needs to be appreciated by people, that we need oil and gas, not because we're addicted to it, but because we appreciate the quality of life that it provides, that we appreciate the growth that it has allowed us to achieve as not only a state, not only a nation, but as a world. On the second one, one of the things that I've always appreciated about this region as I've been out here is if you are willing to lean in, if you are willing to go out to events, if you're willing to shake people's hands, you will find people that want to help you succeed. There might be a little bit of a selfishness to it because they're trying to figure out how they can succeed with you, but they want you to succeed. So my encouragement to you would be to continue to find ways to plug into your local community, go and shake hands and introduce yourself to people, get involved with chambers of commerce, to find other people that are out there that want to figure out how to improve their lives, because you're not the only one out there trying to do that, and there's other people that want to help you figure out how to do it.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Wolf. I am an Odessa College employee in the Office of Advancement, but my husband owns a small environmental remediation company in the Permian Basin. And we had heard recently about the Railroad Commission fund for those funds for plugging and addressing those orphan wells, but didn't know much about it. Is that something that those companies, like the smaller, the environmental companies, have to be contracted by a landowner, or can you apply directly to the Railroad Commission for, for that funding, or to be pointed in the right direction
Yeah,
to
so I
get
think
those
that,
jobs?
that's a fantastic question. So the reality is we're talking about orphaned wells, but there's two buckets that you just need to be aware of because they can both be beneficial to you. One of them is the private industry. I mean, there are companies out there that have low producing wells that they want to plug themselves. They're not orphaned wells, but they are low producing wells that they don't see the economic benefit to, and they want to make sure they're taking care of them, and they're required to plug them properly by regulation and code. So working with those companies, you can find that work that way. For those orphaned wells, you would work directly with the Railroad Commission to be able to get the funding through them and probably contract specifically with them to do that work.
Okay. Yeah, and like you said, you know, it is harder to compete with the big environmental companies, but there's definitely work out there. So.
Best of luck.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Let's give the panel a hand.